Then we're going to be seeing bigger lorries on our roads after the government has given the move the green light. The Department for Transport's announced that lorry trailers up to 61 feet, that's 18.55 metres long, some 6 foot 9 inches longer than the standard size, around about 2 metres longer, will now be allowed. The reason, they say, it will make businesses more efficient and cut emissions. But campaign groups warn the move could put pedestrians and cyclists at risk. Longer lorries obviously will be able to carry more goods in fewer trips, but they will have a larger tail swing, meaning their rear end covers a greater area when turning. They also have extended blind spots. Let's have a chat now with Morton Cullimer. Morton, of course, Gloucestershire businessman, managing director of the Gloucestershire Gravel and Transport Company Cullimore Group, and looks after the Road Haulage Association as well. Morton, thank you ever so much for joining us on the programme. It's really interesting looking at this move then from the government. What do you make of it? How much difference is this really going to make?
Look, I think for some vehicles and some businesses, this will, give an added advantage of being able to carry more goods, to our retail distribution centres, like the supermarkets, for example. The flip side of that, companies like mine, where you are much more dependent on how much weight you can carry rather than physical volume, it doesn't really give us much of an advantage. So in terms of our construction products delivery, this doesn't mean anything for us because they've not increased the weight limit. It's the difference between, can you carry 20 pallets of cornflakes, for example, versus 20 pallets of construction bricks.
Right. So are you lobbying for an increase in the weight, or is that a fair way off now?
I think there's still some work to do. I think, if there was to be a unilateral benefit to all hauliers, then yes, there needs to be an increase in, the weight restrictions. And what we're looking for isn't much. It's only an increase by 4 tonnes. That's not necessarily making the vehicles any bigger. It's just allowing on these more modern vehicles that we operate now, which have better braking systems, better engines, more efficient engines, to just be able to carry more in the same sort of size vehicle. But that's notwithstanding that the longer vehicles for other parts of the distribution sector and the supply chain is a great advantage.
And how does this work with the push to try and make more of these vehicles battery operated? If they're going to be longer, they're going to carry bigger loads, will they need bigger batteries? I mean, how's that going to work?
I mean, essentially, no, because the battery consumption will be derived by the weight. So if the restrictions stay where they are and the weight capacity doesn't change, then that vehicle will still only be able to pull at 44 tons. So while they're a bit longer, that won't actually increase the power consumption of that vehicle. I think on some of these vehicles, especially the larger ones, we're quite some way off technologically wise to use fully electric vehicles. Where we will see the electric vehicles will be more on the small stuff and the sort of couriers and deliveries that we see sort of in our larger towns.
But the flip side, of course, is that they're saying that these larger vehicles, although not helping out your business, for things like goods that we go into our shops for, there should be fewer journeys being made by these lorries, which will have an impact on our environment.
Yeah, for sure. Like the less deliveries you can make, obviously, the more goods you can carry, and the less trips. And obviously, the less trips, the more CO2 is created. So it's estimated that there's around 70,000 tonnes of reduction in CO2 emissions with this new legislation. So it is an improvement for sure. It is an added advantage on that front.
As somebody who's never driven a vehicle of that size, how worried should we be about these extended blind spots by these larger vehicles? How much more dangerous could it be on the roads?
Hey, look, in the last 5 years, technology on the truck has come on leaps and bounds. There's not a lot of difference between some of the technology that you see in Teslas, with all the cameras that are mounted, around the vehicle these days. Blind spots have dramatically decreased on trucks. That's not to say that every truck we see out there on Gloucestershire has this technology, but most modern fleet operators are using these modern vehicles to new standards and new conformities, which have reduced blind spots. That said, a big vehicle is a big vehicle, and you're always going to have blind spots. And that's where it comes down to proper training for the driver, proper installation of the regulations and experience, but also the general public and the cyclists, which is obviously where there's some concern as well, are better educated in how to approach vehicles of that size. But technology has allowed us to dramatically improve safety.
But of course, that tail swing, we don't have the benefit of that as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, as another road user of thinking, hang on a minute, this is a longer than normal vehicle. I need to give extra space.
Yeah, there is better signage on vehicles these days, and also the technology of the rear axle of these trailers now has changed in that rear end moves a little bit differently, moves a little bit more effectively. Look, you're never going to eliminate the problem, but it's no more dangerous. The science so far, the studies on these longer vehicles so far, hasn't said that there's an increase in problems. And I think ultimately these types of vehicles will see more on the motorways, the dual carriageways, and into the major distribution centres, rather than necessarily on our rural roads, such in Gloucestershire.
And that's a real point that I'm sure people are thinking, hang on a minute, we see lorries coming through my village at the moment. How on earth are they, as a longer lorry, going to get through those villages? And that will be a worry to some hearing this now.
Of course it will, but that comes down to your transport department at the haulage company, and the fact that they have to plan the most efficient and safe routes for the vehicles, and that is at the forefront of all companies such as mine. Yes, of course, there's these well documented cases where you see lorries going down the wrong way or through weight restricted areas. But again, that comes down to technology and mapping and routing systems now, which is much better than it was 5 years ago. And I think that will only continue to improve. But I understand the public concern about it for sure. But again, if you're doing your research and you're planning your vehicle properly, there shouldn't be any problem.
So this for you then has one detrimental thing that you'd like to sort out. You want the weight limits lifted, as well as the length of the vehicles being extended.
Yeah, look, for when we're carrying concrete or sand and gravel, these new legislations don't add anything to us. However, it's a step in the right direction for the rest of the industry. If we can carry a little bit more weight on our larger vehicles, it means we also will have less trips to site, cutting CO2 and cutting the amount of deliveries in a day per truck. So, I think there's still work in progress on this for sure.
Morton, really interesting to get your take on this. Thanks ever so much for joining us on the programme.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Morton Cullimore from the Road Haulage Association, also, of course, Managing Director of the Gloucestershire and Gravel and Transport Company, the Cullimore Group.